Hi, my name is Kassie LaRoche. I am presenting my ethical dilemma. I currently work at Spectrum Neural Behavioral Care in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. Um, Before I get into my ethical dilemma, I wanted to talk about the ethical framework I chose for my ethical dilemma. I chose ethical relativism because a big part of that is considering the context and circumstances of the dilemma at hand. In this case, client characteristics such as gender, race, socioeconomic status, and age played a role in it, albeit not a huge role, but I think there's a possibility those were potential factors in this situation. Also, the agency's role, the client's efforts, and my capabilities were things that I needed to take into consideration. Also, another reason why I went with the ethical relativism is because of the diverse and unpredictable population of people social workers tend to work with, especially in a therapy session. So, a little bit about my dilemma. My dilemma involves one of my clients. Her name is Clarissa. I had an appointment for an initial assessment with her. And within the first few minutes or so of the appointment, I had realized that she was seeking treatment solely for an eating disorder. She had been with her former therapist for about 5 years, and they worked a lot on depression and anxiety, but they were at the point where Clarissa didn't really need any more therapy surrounding that. It was really at the point where the eating disorder needed to be the focus of treatment, and the therapist wasn't trained or skilled to provide that for her. So she ended up doing this internet search and came across my agency. And when she had called to make the appointment, she was very clear that she needed someone who specializes in eating disorders. And somehow she was given an appointment with me. I'm an intern. I don't have that type of training, but nonetheless, she was scheduled with me. And during our appointment, when she was explaining this to me, there were a lot of things that I had to consider. One is that, like I said, I'm not trained in eating disorders. The second is that I'm also not passionate about treating eating disorders. My skill set and my interests lie more in helping clients with more severe and persistent mental illness. For example, I prefer to work with clients who have diagnoses such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, things along that line. I work for a community mental health agency, and I've been in this line of work for the past 15 years, so that's kind of why I feel the way that I do about treating eating disorders. Also, on the other hand, I didn't want to turn away any clients. I'm an intern. I want to make a good first impression. There's a possibility I may be offered a job at the completion of my internship. So there's some selfish motives there. Also, I didn't want the director to, be upset that I had turned away a client, just because his background isn't clinical, it's more business. But then again, he is a decent guy. He does listen to us, but nonetheless, it was still a consideration. Also, I really wanted to help her in the moment. I felt bad, and I just didn't want to have the appointment be, oh, I'm sorry, I can't give you what you want. Better luck with the next person. Um, and I knew that the right thing was for this client to get a therapist who specializes in eating disorders. Um, so those were the factors that were going through my mind. And I ended up using the session time to help her find um, providers and resources in the community to help her get what she wanted. Also, I did tell her I will mention it to the director and the receptionist and see if there is someone within the agency to provide her with the therapy she was looking for. Um, so anyway, more about Clarissa. She has a fiance who lives with her. He did cheat on her, so as a result, she's self-conscious. They have a reciprocal relationship, and it's good now. They were able to move past a lot of negative stuff that happened around the time that the fiance was cheating. However, it's still in the back of her mind, and it makes her self-conscious. In addition to that, she has a lot of close friends, and she often compares herself to them. As far as weight and appearance and so forth. Um, but aside from that, the circle of friends that she has, it is a reciprocal type of relationship. And she, overall identifies it as a supportive one. She does have a couple stressful relationships in her life. One is with her mother. Her mother kind of, depends on her for support, but it's not a reciprocal thing. It's very one way. That can be stressful for her at times. And just the added stress on top of everything else does not help. Also, her work is also a source of stress for her. And again, stress in this situation isn't particularly helpful. The relationship she had with her therapist was good, but as I mentioned earlier, it was time for them to terminate because it just wasn't an appropriate fit anymore. And then she also has her relationship with Spectrum Neural Behavioral Care, where I do my internship. We didn't make the best first impression by assigning her to an intern who didn't know how to treat eating disorders. But I was able to help her out, and I think that um, kind of made the situation less disappointing for her. One of the things that I thought contributed to the situation with Clarissa is, perhaps the attitudes in our culture regarding eating disorders. Men are affected by it. It's uncertain if they're affected by it as much as women are because they don't always report the behaviors and symptoms of an eating disorder. But nonetheless, it is regarded as a disorder affecting primarily women. Whether or not that's accurate, that is the perception. And oftentimes, women's issues aren't treated as seriously as issues affecting both men and women. So I think that played into it. Not positive, but it's very likely that attitudes such as that resulted in her request for an eating disorder therapist, to be taken less seriously. Uh, there were no laws that factored into this. However, I did have a discussion with the director about how we screen clients, and it would be helpful for a therapist to know why a client is coming to them before the therapy appointment. Before every appointment, I look into the chart of the client I'm about to meet, but sometimes there just isn't any information. So that was something I was talking to him about, and how we can improve that to better meet client need. Um, Also, as far as my decision-making model is concerned, I chose the ethical assessment screening standpoint, because it involves, assessing the values, ethics, conflicts, alternatives in the situation. I felt it was the most appropriate for this ethical dilemma. Again, as I mentioned, it was about giving the client the treatment she needed, and not providing therapy I was not trained to do, just because it may have been easier for me in the moment. I mean, I could have very easily talked to this woman, got the information I needed, and then sent her on her way and let Spectrum and the client figure it out for themselves. Not the right thing to do, but it was a possibility. I didn't really feel comfortable in the moment. So, a little part of me was tempted to go that route, but I'm glad I didn't. Um, Also, I had to minimize conflicts, and the biggest conflict was my feelings. And I just had to put that aside. I had to put aside my desire to help this client in the moment, and also my desire not to create any issues at my internship. Luckily, I was able to discover an alternative, which was using our session to find another provider. So we did a Google search while I had her online. This was a Zoom meeting. And, I gave her resources and I gave her a few names of agencies and providers in the area. And when I was deciding how to handle the situation, I, did put into consideration the long and the short-term effects of it. So like I mentioned before, providing therapy during the session, and finding another provider would have been easier in the moment and would have made her feel better. But in the long run, it wouldn't have. It wouldn't have really accomplished anything. And in the long run now, with the way things played out, is that, Clarissa got what she needed. I had the opportunity to learn more about the intake and screening process and an opportunity to discuss policy, intake, screenings, and so forth with the director, along with my clinical supervisor.